Who's to blame for the Pelicans' struggles even when healthy? Is tanking this year actually a blessing in disguise? And let's remember some past Pelicans with Will Guillory in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans at NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. And I am joined by the one, the only, he might be a little bit more Texas flavored after this trip here, Will Guillory, at Will Guillory on Twitter. Will, what's going on, man?
I'm doing well, man. Quick trip to Houston. Not too much Texas. I mean, you can have a little too much Texas going on. So I'm trying to keep it as limited as possible.
Okay. Not coming back in boots and a hat or anything like that?
Nah, no cowboy shirts or Astros hats. None of that going on.
Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can bet $5 and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So I'm going to throw a very large question at you to start here. Well, you actually touched on this, I think, a little bit in your most recent article for The Athletic, looking at DeJounte Murray, and I think it ties into that a little bit here. Look, there's a lot of injuries to this team. That's the reason this season has kind of been derailed. But I get the feeling, and I even talked about this earlier in the week, they shouldn't be this bad, it feels like. And it just feels like there's something more. Is that the same sense that you get when you watch this team play right now?
Yeah, I think in November, most of those games we were watching and saying, look, it's a lot of Jalen Noel. It's a lot of Javonte Green. It's a lot of Jeremiah Robinson Earl going on. You were looking at those games and saying, man, it's a slog getting through this. But eventually they're going to have Herb back out there. They're going to have Trey back out there. They're going to have CJ back out there. DeJounte's coming back. So you figured, those guys will come back and at least this team can look like, somewhat maybe like a 500 type ball club, a team that can be competitive in most games. And I think, what I wrote in my most recent piece is that, it's been pretty frustrating because it feels like they've kind of taken a step back since they've gotten a lot of their guys back. It feels like, these games, they had the OKC game where they were down by 30 in the first half. I think I wrote, in DeJounte's 9 games since he returned from injury, 6 of them have been double-digit losses. Mm-hmm. And, some really ugly performances along the way. I think that's been where the frustration has kind of hit a boiling point where it's like, okay, it's tough to continue to lose when all of these guys are out, but then they come back and it feels like they're even more disjointed. It feels like the offense is more stagnant than ever. It feels like they're just making a whole lot of like just boneheaded mistakes. And I think that's where a lot of the frustration is coming.
Yeah, like you look at it like the Indiana game, right? Your starting lineup is DeJounte Murray, CJ McCollum, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, and Yves Missi. And while that's not like a lineup that's going to lead you to a great ton of playoff success, let's say, it feels like you shouldn't be losing by 20 to that. And when we saw some of these games, even with like fewer quality NBA players, it was a 5-point loss or under 10 points. It was single digits. And I said a lot of like, these are moral victories because if you can build off of those, get some of your guys back, those start to turn into victories. And that hasn't seemed to happen here. And I'm not saying like fire the coach or we don't need to go that. They'll say that in the comments section down below here. But you said it, right? Like it seems like they've taken a step back. And I think that's what's so frustrating about this. And that just speaks to what it feels like are deeper issues potentially here.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think that's where the conversations about Willie Green are going to be natural because, when you see a team just struggling like this and you have your guys in place, a lot of the questions are going to like, what's going on? And I think in particular, when you see how they're just looking on offense right now, I think that's where it's just like, what's happening? Why is everybody just standing around? Why is DeJounte Murray just stacking up these turnovers? The guy, I wrote it, the guy never had more than 7 turnovers the first 480 games of his career. And then he put up 8 in back-to-back games. That just doesn't even feel real. And I think that's where it feels like there's not a whole lot of direction. There's not a whole lot of unison and everybody kind of being on the same page of what they need to do to succeed. And I think that's been the most perplexing part. Is just like, okay, you kind of have these guys in place that can help you be more competitive, but they don't really seem to have that plan in place to be like, okay, this is what it needs to look like for us to be better with this group of guys. And I think it's much bigger than that. And I try to portray that in my DeJounte piece because most of the guys who are healthy now are the guys you want to build with going forward, right? When we're talking about Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, DeJounte Murray, even if whatever level of blow up you're looking for, whichever one of the big names you're looking to trade, those are the guys who still are going to be in New Orleans. And those are the guys who are struggling mightily right now, who are really having a tough time. And I think that's where it gets really concerning because you want, obviously, DeJounte, Herb, and Trey to be a big part of your identity moving forward. But the marriage just hasn't worked early on for whatever reason.
Yeah. So is that kind of then the goal of the, look, they're out of the playoffs, right? Like it'd be a miracle just to make the 10 seed. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next segment here. So what's kind of the direction of the rest of the season? Is it trying to maximize Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, kind of like finding their roles, seeing who you're going to keep on this team going forward? Is it to see if you could still build around Zion, Ingram, those two? Like, obviously expectations are going to change, and this isn't the conversation we thought we were going to be having right now, but it's not like there's nothing left to play for. There's still things to figure out and learn and to try and accomplish this year.
Yeah, of course. I think number one at the top of the list is, of course, you want Zion to get healthy. You want him to get back on the court and forget about fit. You just want to see him go a couple months without an injury, right? I think that's the number one at the top goal is you want to get Zion on the court. You want to you want to see him at least put some kind of extended stretch on the court, healthy, playing well. And I think right under that, you want to see, like we've been talking about, these guys showing some type of chemistry, showing some type of growth and how they're playing together. DeJounte kind of taking over as that leader, that point guard that they intended him to be, and in that, bringing the most out of Herb Jones, bringing the most out of Trey Murphy. And I think you want to see these guys develop something where you can kind of go into the offseason and say, okay, we saw this from these guys. We saw them be able to build. We saw them figure out some things, learn how to play together. And that's really the main goal. And I think what's really been tough is it just feels like in so many of these games, they're just in a 15-point hole immediately. As soon as the game starts, it's just like they're down, they're out. And it's straight. I can hear, you mentioned the Indiana game, I can hear, shout out to our guy Joel Myers, I can hear him in my head during the course of that game saying they need a run. They got to put a run together. And it just felt like the run just never happened. And I think that's what, and I'm watching this team a lot of times, it's just like, there's just nothing there. It's just like they're trying to get something going, and it just feels like, we saw stretches with that team last year where there were times where they looked really bad and the offense was a struggle, and there were times where all of a sudden they clicked and they just looked amazing, right? And it was just kind of, that was the kind of the thing with last year's team is like when they were great, they were really great, and when they were bad, it just hit the bottom. And with this team, we haven't seen that ability to kind of hit that peak that, okay, this is what it looks like when we're really good. We really haven't seen it very much. Of course, they've won like one or two games with DeJounte in there, but I think the thing you really want to see is them establish some level of identity and understanding what they got to do to succeed with those guys out there.
So to wrap the segment up, I'll ask you this with that. You said establish some sort of identity. Is that a coaching thing? Is that a front office and a roster thing? Like how does a team go about trying to establish that identity and like learning some of the things they need to do?
Listen, I mean, when it's this bad, everybody has a hand in it. Everybody has to do it, right? I think the coaches need to do a better job. The players need to do a better job. The front office need to find better players to fit, maybe better role guys. Of course, it would help if even a Jordan Hawkins could get healthy. You can throw maybe a Jose Alvarado would help a little bit. You know what I mean? We're not even talking about the main guys, but I think everybody has a hand in what's going on right now. And I think obviously when you're missing your two best players, it's really difficult. But man, we said it, this team has enough talent. Like Trey Murphy just got that big contract for a reason. He's a very talented basketball player. DeJounte Murray has been very successful in this league for a long time. These guys have we know the CJ's track record. We these guys have what it takes to win. They just need to get more time on task. I think it's been really helpful for them during this little, Vegas run where they've been able to stay home, get a whole bunch of practices in. I know they got another practice in today. I think, that's been really important for them because they missed so much time just to get that time on the court.
Yeah,
where they
there's
can
no like
speak
training
through
camp for
things.
some of these guys, essentially,
Zero.
right?
I
Like,
mean,
and no preseason and being able to build that. It's like, you're starting, game one was 2 months ago, but it feels like game one was actually truly a week ago for this team in a sense.
and it didn't even get training camp because Trey Murphy got hurt the second day, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the preseason, Zion's in and out, Bi's in and out. Then DeJounte breaks his hand the very first game of the season. That these guys have basically had zero time together on the court. So I think it'll help them to get some time. But I do think, number one, what you want to see from them is just a little bit more fight, just a little bit
Yeah.
more like
Just life, right? In
just
them,
life, man.
they're just flat, right? Like it's,
Yes.
to quote John Summerall here, like they're juiceless, I think. And it's like, it's just something's missing is the best way to put it, right? Like it's tough to put your finger exactly on what that is, but like they're lacking something.
Yeah, no doubt. They're lacking juice. They're lacking that, where it felt like last year's team, there was just a great belief. And no matter what, even though there were times we would look at them and say, maybe they don't have it, or maybe these pieces don't fit, or maybe these guys don't shoot enough threes. You always felt that ultimate belief with those guys that they always thought they were going to find a way, basically up until the end, where in OKC, where they basically just knew they had no chance. But I think all the way up to that point, even when BI went down to Orlando, they just constantly maintained that belief, and maybe a big part of it was the presence of Najee Marshall and Jose Alvarado, kind of the energy they brought. And I think that's a big thing that we've seen that's missing from this team, where we constantly talked about last year, the starting five, they're kind of mediocre. The numbers aren't great. But as soon as you bring in Jose, as soon as you bring in Najee, as soon as you bring in Larry Nance, Dyson Daniels, it just clicks. Everything takes off. And it feels that, and I feel they just haven't had that this year with the bench unit. And it feels like a lot of it has fallen on that starting five. And those guys just haven't clicked. And I think, Trey Murphy's going to get better over time. Trey Murphy's not going to be a 30% three-point shooter.
Right.
The same thing for CJ. His shooting numbers are going to go up over time. It feels like Herb Jones, even before the injury, was struggling with some confidence issues on the offensive end. I think that'll get better over time. I don't think DeJounte's going to turn the ball over 8 times every game, but who knows? I mean, we'll see.
No. It should have been 9 against the Kings. They didn't give him a turnover on that final possession.
Yeah,
they counted that as a block shot, which
they called it a block. Right.
Same thing, but yeah. All right, coming up next here with Will Guillory of The Athletic. Let's look at Yves Missi, some bright spots here in this Pelican season. That's coming up here next. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is sponsored by Built Rewards. If you're a renter, listen up because this is a total game changer. Thanks to Built, B-I-L-T, you can now earn points on rent payments just like you do with groceries or travel. So paying rent now comes with serious perks and it's completely free to join. Earn valuable Built points on your rent and everyday spending at no extra cost. And you can redeem those points for flights, hotel stays, even future rent payments with over 500 airlines and 700,000 hotels in their program. There's possibilities are endless. Access unique experiences that are exclusive to Built members as well. I love using points for travel, for vacations, making things a little bit cheaper. So if you're into rewards here and you're already paying rent, make that work for you. So start earning points on rent you're already paying by going to joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNBA. That's joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNBA. Make sure to use our link so they know we sent you. Don't wait. Start earning rewards today. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is also brought to you by my go-to ticketing app, Game Time. Game Time is focused on togetherness this holiday season, and that means when you bring people together at live events, the experience is just that much better, and it's also the perfect gift. And to make it even easier, Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I love all the features that Game Time has, and that's why I use it whenever I'm purchasing tickets or go to a place in particular that I've never been to before. You have the seat view that get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. I like the all-in pricing, no surprise fees at checkout when you toggle this up front. You have the Game Time Picks for curation to make it easier to find the tickets that you want. And you can use this on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. Please subscribe to the Locked On Pelicans daily newsletter over at LockedOnDaily.com. Just scroll down to you see the Locked On Pelicans logo. Click on that. You're going to get Locked On Pelicans in your inbox Monday through Friday. So I'm joined by Will Guillory of The Athletic here. All right, well, let's be a little bit positive. And one of these is like a backhanded positive compliment that I'm going to say here, but let's play a little bit of real or fake, which we do on Locked On NBA a lot. Real or fake, Yves Missi is the brightest spot for the Pelicans this season.
Oh, I don't even think it's a competition. Like,
No.
it's by far. And it's not only just because he's been so good, because it's come at a position that was of desperate need for this team coming into the season. Before the year, we were talking about Herb Jones starting center, Daniel Tice.
Like, remember all that small ball talk we had, and now it's like, yeah, you could see some of it, but they're not going to start a small ball. Like, say everyone's healthy, Missi still starts, right? It feels like it has to, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's, like you said, that's the biggest bright spot for this team is they found that guy. And I think what we talked about so much during the offseason is wanting to find the guy who can not just be plugged into that position, but provide a lot of the things you need from centers these days, with the athleticism, with the defensive versatility, him being a floor spacer with his lob threat.
Yeah.
I think he's even shown a little bit more than I expected, like with his ball handling and dribble handoff game. He's shown a little bit of footwork. We see him do a couple ISOs on guys. I think he's shown much more than I expected from him at this stage of his career. And I think that gives you a lot of promise about what he can be as he continues to grow, as he puts on more muscle, gains experience from having so many starts this season. I think it's a huge win. And then we got to mention, they got this guy, the 21st pick.
Yeah.
I mean, usually you're taking a center at 21, you're expecting him to spend most of his rookie year in the G League, and you're hoping he can maybe be a backup in year 2. We're talking about a guy who's going to end up, if he stays healthy, starting the majority of the games this season. And like you said, even with everybody healthy, you still feel like he's going to be your guy at the center position. And it's so important, when we're talking about in the Southwest Division, where you got Wembanyama, you got Derek Lively, you got Şengün. There's so many great centers. Not just in the West.
Too. Yeah,
Zach Edey. I mean, you look at not just in the West, there are a lot of great centers, but in this specific division, you're going to see these guys 4 times a year for years to come. And finding an answer there was extremely important, and it felt like they hit on it, with the 21st pick.
Look, a guy a lot of people wanted was Khalil Ware, and he went 15 to Miami, and that's someone who's not even playing 7 minutes per game right now. And look at what Missi is doing a couple of picks later, different skill sets there, but I mean, still, it speaks to Missi and what he's been able to do. What's been the most impressive part of his game to you when you watched him?
I just think his comfort on the offensive end is just something I didn't see. I thought he would be a guy who would obviously catch lobs, who could maybe run a little pick and roll. But they've been trusting him more and more in dribble handoff situations. They'll let him isolate a smaller guy on the wing every now and then. His footwork is really good. I just think he looks comfortable. And I think a lot of times with these young centers, they look a little lost. I think there were times early in the year where he looked a little bit lost out there, but he looks like a guy who knows how to play basketball. And I think that sounds like a backhanded compliment, but we're talking about a dude who just started playing in his teenage years.
Yeah, a couple years ago. Basketball.
Right. So, to step in this early in your first year in the NBA, it feels like so much has been thrown on his plate early on, probably way more than it should be, right, this early in his career. And he's kind of taking it all on in stride. And I think what you hear constantly from players and coaches is that he kind of soaks up things very quickly, right? It's not like you see him making the same mistakes over and over again. They're able to tell him something, and he's able to register it very quickly, which is such an important trait in this league, because you see guys who it takes them time to learn things, and they keep making the same mistakes. You think of like Jackson Hayes during his rookie year, where he used to jump at every pump fake. Right, and you could just like clockwork.
Not just his rookie year, man. He's probably still doing that now, like 6 years into the league.
Exactly, and I think you've seen not just him continuously talking about get those minutes throughout the course of the season, but you've seen him gradually get better over time and improving some of the flaws in his game, and it's extremely impressive. Because again, once this guy gets a full offseason, he adds some more muscle, and he's able to figure a few other things out. I think, he's got a really good chance of making a big jump in year 2.
It's interesting when we think about like skill sets and kind of looking at players, because it felt like David Griffin and the rest of the front office kind of zeroed in on Misi, like kind of right off the jump. And the second they were up on the clock, it was like, that's going to be Misi. There's no question that this is who they are taking with that pick. And, you look at things like maybe 3-point shooting with a Khalil Ware or some of these other guys that you feel like, oh, that projects good at the NBA. But sometimes it's those kind of like hidden talents or those intangibles that you don't see. And you had talked about his ability to like take in information, process it, and then kind of use that out there on the court. And that, I think, has been the most impressive thing. And that was something that it seemed like the Pelicans front office realized about him early on, that this is a guy that's going to be able to improve pretty quickly because of how smart he is. Like, you go back to his first, summer league and then his first preseason game, he was a fouling machine. And I was like, there's no way this guy's going to be able to stay on the court. I don't care how good he is, but if you're fouling and you're fouled out of the game, you're not going to be on there. He's barely averaging 2 fouls per game right now, which I think for a rookie center that's getting blitzed at the rim at times is like,
it's insane. It's insane, man.
Pretty incredible.
And I was out there in Nashville during training camp, and I remember talking to people, and they were like, "Listen, we like you, but he's not ready." And that was one of the first things you heard.
That was like the theme about it.
Yeah, it's like he's got some stuff with him, but he's not ready whatsoever. And you heard that early and often. You saw them kind of leaning more towards Daniel Tice as the starting center early going into the start of the season. Like, it wasn't even a question about whether Eve was challenging for that starting spot. And I remember watching that preseason game, and ironically, I'm back here in Houston when they played against Houston, and they started Eve in the second half at center with the starters, and it kind of clicked in my mind like, oh, this just makes sense. It just fit immediately. You kind of saw it, and even then, there were times, like you said, where he would bite on certain moves and get caught in the wrong spot. He would be late on rotations and get caught fouling. And for him, the fouls, I mean, I don't even remember this game where like fouls were an issue for him.
Yeah,
where it was like, hey, they got to sit Misi. He's got 5 fouls. I don't even remember that happening at any point this year. For him to
no, I don't think it has. Like,
man, it's wild.
That's one of the most impressive things to me is like he looked like he was going to be fouling and fouling. Nope, not at all. And it's somehow he learned what to do and did not do that and helps them be better. It's been really like the biggest bright spot. Let me ask you this. This is the like kind of backhanded bright spot compliment. Is it good that they were bad this year with the upcoming draft? Like, if you were ever going to have to kind of go through something given their situation, is this in some weird way, like maybe like a silver lining or something like that with it? The draft, there's at least 5 guys, it feels like, that are going to be pretty impactful players.
I would say yes and no. I would say with this draft, yes. I think it's great to be at the top of this draft because I love basically all of these guys. When we get to the top of it, I'm kind of looking forward to talking draft when we get to the end of the year. I've already like gotten with my editors.
End of the year, huh? End of the year is when we're gonna next week.
Year, I mean end of December.
This year, 2024. Yes, I agree with you. I was like, you really gonna wait till March and April? Right, I'm not.
But no, I think when you look at this draft, and even beyond Cooper Flagg, who's getting all the attention, you're talking about Ace Bailey, Dylan Harper, the guy from BYU, BJ Edgecombe. We could just go down the list. There is so much talent in this draft. Even like if you end up with like the 5th pick, you can feel really good about the guy you're getting in this draft. So I think this is a good time to be the team that kind of plummets more than you expect and you trip into a top 5 pick. I think that could be really beneficial. But I do think this is a really tough year to be bad when it comes to the players on their current roster. When you're dealing with BI going into he is an expiring contract. CJ being 1 year away from being an expiring contract. The uncertainty with Zion dealing with another injury. I think making decisions on those guys, and I think that's going to be a huge talking point for this team going forward, is really tough considering where they are right now. And we talked last year about BI having his value being as low as it's ever been coming off of that playoff series. And it's like, hey, trade BI. And it's like, okay, but who's giving up stuff for BI after the way he looked in that playoff series? And now it's like, yeah, BI looked very good to start this year, but he's hurt again. And he may come back like maybe 2-3 weeks before the trade deadline.
Who knows,
how many
right?
teams are going to be willing to jump out there and take a risk on him? And then you got to worry about the next contract with him. So I think that's what's really difficult about the position they put themselves in. It's like what they wanted to do even going back to the start of the year was like, hey, we want to delay all of these decisions as long as
Yeah.
we possibly can. We don't want to make the BI decision right now. We don't want to fully commit to Zion beyond this current contract. We don't want to figure out what's going on with CJ. We just want to see these guys win together, and then that'll make the decision for us, right? I think that was their game plan going into the year, and then it all fell apart, and now it's like, okay, now you need to make this decision in December. And I
Yeah.
think that's a really uncomfortable position for them, not only because any of these guys, it's difficult, but then you feel like you're up against the clock of the trade deadline, which adds even more urgency to everything you're doing.
Well, it makes it feel like it's not just this wasted year, but like maybe potentially next year. It also somewhat makes last year feel a little bit like a wasted year, kind of putting some hindsight into it too, of like, we were supposed to see what they could do last year so that we know what to expect this year. And then it all fell apart again. And it's like, well, if we knew this was going to happen, you would have made some bigger moves last season and not kind of kick this can down the road where you're up against that kind of time crunch on it. And maybe you get more value. And I understand why they did it the way that they did. It's just this year feels like it both impacts the past and how we view it and what we might view in the future, which I will ask you about coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, the Pelicans are +10 against the Houston Rockets. Do they keep it within that, or is this going to be another 20-point blowout? If you've got an idea, well, you can get ready to take on all of the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL and NBA all in one place. Maybe the Pelicans are fading in the second half. You realize that's happening here. Get in on the action in the middle of a game with those updated lines. Never waste your hunch with FanDuel. You can also view the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And just visit FanDuel.com to join today. And you're going to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. Now for your second listen, Ross Jackson over the Locked On Saints podcast is covering everything black and gold, looking at Spencer Rattler going forward, what they're going to do with the head coaching situation. Make sure you make Locked On Saints your second listen today, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Here with Will Guillory of The Athletic, and we were just talking a little bit about how being bad this year could be kind of a good thing, though it has other knock-on impacts of this roster. So let me ask you this, Will, and this was something that a couple people actually asked. I teased that you're coming on the show today, asked in the comments of, so what would you do? Is it as simple as like clear out salary and just try and kind of start fresh, move on from Ingram, Zion, CJ in some capacity to free up maybe $30 million in cap space, which, look, if you trade CJ for expirings and let Ingram walk, you can kind of get there relatively quickly. It feels like, we talked about this draft with some of the guys you had mentioned, but not just this upcoming draft, but the one in 2 years also looks pretty good. Like if you were ever to try and kind of do a big, hard pivot from being competitive, now might be the time to do it. There's kind of two sides to this, right? Like, is that the right thing to do? And then would the Pelicans actually do that is the other question, which is very different.
I think, assuming that you can get Zion healthy back at some point, I think it would be even more disastrous if you committed so much to Zion, Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, and DeJounte Murray, and they're this bad again next year. I think that would be, even bigger questions than like, okay, you committed to this roster, you let BI walk, you got rid of CJ, and now these guys are losing as well. I think that would be a really tough blow, maybe even tougher than the blow this year. Just because, there's so much love, obviously, for Herb and Trey. And if it's like, okay, if those guys are going 2 straight years, losing 50-plus games, and are these guys actually as good as we thought they were? You know what I mean? Was the DeJounte trade a complete and utter disaster? I think that's the questions you're getting to when it's like, okay, maybe we need to start having conversations about the front office, like what's going on with ownership. I think it's much bigger than the current questions that we're dealing with right now. But I do think that, at some point, you gotta figure out what the next phase is. And I've kind of said this before, even if you are a fan of these guys individually, I think very highly of Brandon Ingram as a player. I think very highly of Zion Williamson as a player. But I think it's very hard to sell to the fans, hey, we're going to run it back one more time and let's hope for the best.
No,
I think
like
that's
they can't do that, right? Like I get why they would. Look, and it's also people's jobs are on the line, right? Like,
Exactly.
Is David Griffin going to be retained if he's like, we're going to do a full pivot, we're going to clear the books and all of this? Because everything he's kind of been building, which is around Zion, just hasn't worked. Some of that's roster choices, some of it's probably coaching, some of it's on the players and the injuries too. And it feels weird to like, it's tough just to flush that away, I think, and be like, we're starting fresh. And they probably just won't do that because people don't want to lose their jobs in a sense, right?
Right. And I think, it's very easy for people to hop on Twitter and say, blow it up, blow it up, blow it up, trade all these guys, trade all these guys. But I think the worst position you want to be in the NBA is the team with 0 all-stars trying to find one, right? It's one thing to have that one all-star, hey, we can find one more. Or it's like, hey, we got 2, but we don't really like our 2. That's one thing. But when you're at 0 and you're trying to find one and you don't really know where that guy's coming from, that's a very scary place to be in, especially when you're in a small market like New Orleans, where you're not attracting guys in free agency, where the guys you're drafted might not be that happy about coming to New Orleans. So I think being so quick to say, hey, just get rid of all of these guys, blow it up, we'll go in the draft and figure it out. I think that's very easy to say until you do it, and then you got to live that life. You know what I mean? I think it's extremely difficult.
Look at a team like the Wizards, right? Like they don't look like they're getting out of their rebuild period anytime soon, right? Like they didn't win a game in November. That doesn't look like a team that in 2-3 years is going to be making the playoffs. Houston was on like an 8-year, 7-year playoff drought, probably until they break it this year. But that's a long time to be looking towards the draft and looking towards college at that point in time, right? Phoenix Suns were like that for a really long time till they really kind of turned it around. You don't know how long that period's going to be. It's not like, oh, cool, in 3 years we'll be good again. It could be much longer than that if you don't hit on some of those draft picks immediately. And I think that can be pretty tough. Look at a team like Detroit last year.
That's what awful team.
They didn't get the number 1 overall pick this year. Like that's a rough spot to be in, I think, when it comes to all of that. But I don't know. It's 2 intriguing drafts coming up, so that's why I asked the question.
It's 2 really good drafts, though. Like you said, if you're going to tank, it's a good time to tank.
Yeah,
but I think, like you said, look at Detroit. That's a team, multiple top 5 picks. They got a number 1 overall guy. They feel really good about Cade Cunningham, and they still aren't that much better than they've been the past couple of years, right? You look up in the stands during the Detroit game, it's not a whole lot of people there excited to watch Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, Ron Holland, these top 5 picks, where it's like, hey, I think a lot of, like I said, I think a lot of fans would say, hey, I wish I could have a young, exciting team like that. Right. And it's like Detroit has it, and those stands are empty because they know that team is bad and they're going to be bad for a while.
Yeah, it's still not exciting. They're just a young team. I wouldn't call them exciting necessarily, right? Like, the worst thing to be is bad and boring, in my opinion, which the Pelicans are right now. They are bad and boring. And like, that is just unfun. Bad and exciting, bad and chaotic can be good, but bad and boring is not what you want. That's still what Detroit feels like. Let's have a little bit of fun here. I got some names I'm going to throw at you, but I want to start with this. If you're Damian Lillard, are you massively celebrating the NBA Cup championship and like the first trophy that he's really won at the NBA level?
I know. I was looking at the ceremony. I was like, wow, it feels really weird watching Dame with a T-shirt and a hat on.
Yeah, right. We were not used to this.
Like, he was like, I want to celebrate it, but I know everybody's going to look at me weird if I do. But I mean, hey, nobody's going to be mad about getting $500K.
No.
So listen, celebrate how you want to, Dame. Salute. You got the $500K. I heard him say he's going to give a whole lot of it to support staff, and that sounds like a very Damian Lillard thing to do.
Yeah.
But, man, enjoy it. Go throw the craps around a couple times in the casino. Have some fun while you're out there in Vegas.
I know. It was just like, cool. I'm glad he won something. And then you're like, does it matter or not? Although I'm a big NBA Cup fan. I like all the gimmicks and everything that they do.
I like
here.
it, man. They probably need to get out of Vegas, but that's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah, I think that might be a little bit different. But overall, it makes those games kind of feel like something, and I kind of dig all of that. All right, so last time you were on, we talked Etuan Moore and his rankings, and I did not prep you for these, but I had 2 players that people in the comments in yesterday's show specifically brought up that they wanted your opinions on, whatever that might be. So you can rank them. You can kind of just give us some context around them. Is Jamal Mashburn like an all-time player for the franchise since they've been in New Orleans. He had 2 years in Charlotte with them. We're not counting that. So first 2 years here in New Orleans. Where's like Jamal Mashburn kind of in the context of this franchise?
I'm a big Jamal Mashburn fan. Shout out to the Monster Mash. I still remember that little drop every time he would hit a shot. He had like the killer fadeaway. The only thing, and I went back and looked at Jamal Mashburn when I was doing my small forward rankings last time I was on. And I think the only thing that hurts Mashburn is like he only really had one good year in New Orleans.
He only played 2 total, right? Like
right, yeah. And the second one, he was hurt the whole year.
Pretty much,
like,
yeah.
I think the one thing is that 1 year he was really good, and he had like some really good playoff moments.
All-Star and third-team All-NBA that year.
Yeah, see, I didn't even know he made All-NBA that year.
Yeah, right. Kind of wild to think about.
Right. If you'd asked me 0.5 over under All-NBAs for Mashburn, I probably would have went under.
So he finished tied for 11th in MVP voting, which like, okay, you're not in the top 5, so who cares? That's still something, man. Like,
I didn't even know that goes that deep in the MVP.
Yeah, it looks like, so he got, I'm looking at it now, he got 1 point. 1 point in MVP voting. Look, man, it's better than no points.
Yeah,
right?
Better than none, right, exactly.
Yeah, it's too short of a tenure, right? Like as good as he was that 1 year, 82 games played, 81 starts, 21.6 points per game.
Games?
Yeah, seriously, it's just weird to look at when you see a number that high with everything here. It's like, yeah, he didn't play enough to really kind of like put him in there, I don't think, but it's in that conversation.
I'm a Mashburn fan though. Shout out to Mashburn.
Look, first year here, making an all-star, doing all that, that's, I don't know, pretty impressive. That's something that was like kind of solidifying the team in its place here. The other one I've got for you, PJ Brown.
Oh, PJ Brown, definitely, man, a role player that he's one of those guys when you're an old guy, you're like, man, you remember PJ Brown? And like the young kids don't know nothing about PJ, but he had like the classic ugly. Remember, I talk a lot on this pod about ugly jumpers. PJ Brown's one of those guys with the ugly jumper, but it was consistent. He knocked down that mid-ranger. He was solid as hell. Went on and won the championship with Boston. You love to see guys like have a good career and wrap it up with a championship. And he played a pretty big role on that team. That was what he was there with like Big Cat in that group, right? I want to say he was the 4 next to Big Cat. I think it's funny now if people were to watch a PJ Brown highlight and be like, wait, this was what power forwards used to look like they all like that archetype does not exist in today's NBA. The 6'10" power forward who shoots jumpers and post up every now and then. Those guys are long gone. You got to be 6'9". You got to be able to like jump, run. You got to shoot threes. Guys like that at the 4. But like growing up, me watching basketball, those were the guys who played the 4. Like PJ Brown, David West. You can go down the list of the Anthony Masons, Larry Johnson. Those are the old school 4s. And those guys no longer exist. And now the crazy thing is, speaking of me being an old guy, whenever I think of PJ Brown, the first thing that pops into my mind is that his daughter, Kalani Brown, is now in the WNBA doing really well. I didn't realize that. She was in high school. Yeah. She's in the WNBA.
That is really cool.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I look at now. A lot of these, guys have daughters or sons who are kind of at the next level. We could talk about that at some point with draft because Ron Harper's son, Dylan Harper, is one of the top prospects coming up in this year's draft. And I think it's a little funny when you watch guys who are good in the NBA have daughters and seeing their daughters kind of play really well in the WNBA. Yeah. It kind of shows a different side of them as well.
No, that's a good point on all of that. You're starting to kind of see like that generation where like you and I kind of grew up watching these guys and it's like, oh, they have kids and they're going to be like professional athletes, which makes me feel even older than I already am when it comes to everything here. I pulled up one name here that I'll ask you about. Played 3 games for New Orleans, just 3. I was excited about this move, even though it was like, yeah, probably not. You remember Josh Smith? This one's not that long ago. Yeah, of course.
Absolutely. Josh Smith. He was a part of that. I want to say they got rid of Josh Smith right when they made the Boogie trade, right? I want to say he was one of the guys that they dumped.
17-18. We can look at the transactions here. So, he was cut November 10th. So they signed him in October, like right before the season started or after the season started, and then cut him like 2 weeks later. Yeah, I was excited for him though.
Yeah, I know they had a couple guys like that during that stretch where they would bring him in and like maybe the last legs you can get something here with AD. But yeah, there's a bunch of guys like that during the AD era. I think that was part of his frustration. That how about we get a few young guys in here instead of bringing in all
Nope.
these old dudes?
They were signing guys
out.
in the morning, and those players were starting in the
Yeah,
evening. Like no
it happened.
practice. Like just met their teammates, and it was like go start a game with them, which is just. Nate
Yes.
Robinson's one of those guys too. A couple
Oh
years before
yeah.
Josh Smith, that's like,
Shout out to Wes Johnson. I believe he was one of
yep,
those guys
he
who
was
signed
one of those
immediately
guys.
started. Now he's working on the broadcast with the Pels.
Mm-hmm.
Who's my other guy? DeAndre Liggins, I feel like was a guy
Yep,
like that.
he was
And
one
one
of
is on
them.
the tip of my brain that I can't. Oh, Mbamute. You remember
Yep,
Luke Richard
yep.
Mbamute? He had a cup of coffee and yeah, this
It's
is
like
how you
there's a
can
couple
tell.
guys.
It was some rough times during in
It's
those
like just
years in
man, it's like
search of a three. That's why I laugh at everybody that's like they can't get rid of Brandon Ingram. I'm like, you didn't live those Luke Richard Mbamute days. You want to get rid of an all-star small forward. Good luck in New Orleans because you might be right back to Dante Cunningham and Solo Hill
I
way
miss his
sooner than we
trucks.
think.
The card collection. It was like small forwards and point guards. They just would like cycle through. Walt Lemon Jr. is one of them that they had in. Like so many of those guys where it was like,
Tim
cool, let's
Frazier
just
tripped up.
well, anywhere Anthony Davis was, Tim Frazier was there.
Literally.
We're going a little long here, but let's wrap up on this. Put on your fan hat for a minute here. Who's your like least favorite guy they've ever had on the team?
Oh wow, that's a really good question.
Like
The
just for whatever
guy
reason, you're like, screw. I have two. Like, screw that guy.
I I don't want to say screw that guy,
Okay,
but a
that's
guy
fair.
I used to really not enjoy play basketball was Julian Wright. He was a
Okay.
first round pick,
Yep.
came in with a little hype. Like we said, they needed a three. They needed some younger guys to put around Chris Paul and D West.
Mm-hmm.
And the Julian Wright draft pick was just a crash and burn. You saw it from day one. He wasn't good. He pretty much never got better. It was just rough, and it was just like, man, you need guys like that to hit, and that was a pick that just did not work at all. And I think that was one of I won't say he's the reason, but like that was kind of the reasoning behind the beginning of the end of the Chris Paul era was their inability to find those young guys to be the next generation to pick up CP and D West, and Julian Wright was kind of the face of that.
So it's funny that you picked him because they traded him for Marco Bellinelli, who's probably like my least favorite player on this
Oh
team ever.
wow.
I've also been blocked by him on Twitter for like years. He's like known for just randomly blocking people, and I guess I am one of them. And I had like no idea that he had blocked me. Yeah, I know, right? So Bellinelli is like my guy where I'm like, yeah, no, they just too much hype around Bellinelli. I remember Monty Williams being like, Marco Bellinelli is exactly what we try and be as a team. And it's like, well, that probably tells you about our sights and where the bar is set on the franchise here.
And I'll
So
say, as a media member, I did not enjoy the Alexia Jensa experience. He wasn't very kind to us. I remember he was next to somebody in the locker room, and this is one of those things you wouldn't know, but like when you're in the locker trying to interview a guy at his locker, the guy who was next to that locker who's trying to get dressed while a bunch of media are surrounded by this one guy. There's like, certain guys who kind of act in certain ways during those times. Some guys would be like, let the media do their thing. Jensen will come in and literally push us out of the way so he can get dressed. And they'll just be like, come on, Lexi, man. Like, you got 0 minutes tonight. Just go ahead and put your clothes on and go about your business. So yeah, that's one of the guys at the top of my list for sure.
I'm not sure they were in love with Alexia Ajinça either, especially after they gave him that contract.
Yeah,
Him and Ashik
anybody
in the same day, basically. Let's sign everybody. Oh man, two centers, no hands between the two of them whatsoever.
0 total hands.
Yeah, 0. All right, well, I appreciate you being on here with me in what is a rough Pelican season. Go check them out over at The Athletic. And that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Enjoy the game tonight. We'll be back tomorrow to recap that. And we got some big-time topics to talk about next week. We'll see y'all next time.